Okay, welcome everybody to this event, which is discussing the future of primary maths. We've got a really good turnout here at EdCity, and I know that we've got about 150 people joining online. And I just wanted to say a really big thank you to everybody for joining in today, particularly if you're just come out of school or you've been teaching today. We've got people from the DFE, the EEF, the NCTM, we've got people from OUP, so we've got all the acronyms represented today. And I'm going to try really, really hard to give everybody the opportunity to speak and to contribute. I know that some people have contributed questions in advance, and we have integrated them into the format of today. So why are we here? We know that at the moment is a real change opportunity, not just for primary maths, but for the wider curriculum. So today we're going to be thinking really hard about the incredible potential of young people and maximising that through a new curriculum. So we're going to be talking about the Curriculum and Assessment Review. We're going to be discussing the Horizons report, which published today and is a fantastic read. I really encourage everybody to look at that document if you haven't done so already. We're going to be thinking about the practical implications of change, and in particular thinking about what it means for schools, and hopefully you guys can take away some really, really good tips on what you can be thinking about now in terms of this change moment. The session is going to be split into three parts. So firstly, where we're at now, then we're going to talk about where we want to get to, and then finally, how we're going to get there. And to help us on that journey, I have this amazing panel. I'd like to introduce Palesa Gunn, who is the co-head teacher of King Solomon Academy, which is one of the Ark network of schools and is one of the best primary schools in the country. Peter Foulds, who is the network lead for maths for the Lingfield Trust. Got Aidan Gollaglee, who is the London South East Plus Maths Hub lead, and Dr. Helen Drury, who is the co-lead for the Horizons Maths project and the founder of Ark Curriculum Plus. And we were just discussing earlier, she's one of the very first people to use the term maths mastery in the UK. So she's put a huge amount of amazing thought into the sector. So before we start, just for the people in the room, we've got a fire exit just here. That isn't a planned drill. So just to let you know that that's where the fire exit is. There's going to be points during the session where I'm going to open for questions from the audience, and also we've got people online as well. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, please type them into the chat, and we've got a couple of polls as well. So without further ado, we're going to get started. I'm going to start, I think, with Palesa and Peter. So the Curriculum and Assessment Review emphasises an evolution, not revolution, and sort of praises the gains made in the last 10 years in improving maths education in England. And I think it's important to acknowledge that context. However, some challenges remain. So what's the state of play in maths education now? And what are the things that are stopping schools doing even better? So that's the first question. And the second question is, what is one big change to the curriculum that would transform practice? I'm going to offer that to Palesa first and then Peter.
Hello. Okay. I agree with your first point that actually there's been lots of positives, and I actually think, broadly speaking, the way we teach maths is good. And for the vast majority of pupils, at least in my school, they are able to meet the expected standard and they actually enjoy maths. Everyone always says it's their favourite subject. I think the biggest challenge is, what about that bottom 20%? And particularly post-COVID, we're just seeing more and more numbers of SEND pupils. So what does success look like for them? And actually, this is kind of going to the next point, but the amount of content that needs to be covered means there's this sense of like going through the curriculum and making sure that everything has been taught. And I think that means that you then skip some of the foundations because you just don't have enough time to secure that knowledge. And then you end up with children in year 5 and year 6 who still don't know their number bonds, who still have weaknesses and gaps. That just means it's not appropriate to continue with that curriculum, but it feels scary to say that. And I think we kind of have an interesting situation at our school currently where year 1 to year 4, we're looking at 95% plus of the students at expected standard, but with our year 5s and year 6s, that isn't the case. And Peter was just asking why do I think that standards are so high in maths? And I said it's because of our early years provision. I think we have a really excellent 2-year-old provision, 3-year-old provision and reception. And our current 5 and 6 actually missed out on early years in Key Stage 1 because of COVID. So because they didn't have those foundations, we've just been trying to catch up this entire time. And for year 6, for a group of pupils in January, we had to say, we actually just need to stop and go back to lower Key Stage 2 because you do not understand this. And that felt really scary to do. But doing the mock assessments at the end of March, actually they were so much closer to reaching 100 as a scaled score than they had been because of those foundations, even though we hadn't actually been teaching them year 5 and year 6 content during that time. And hopefully they pass, we'll see in July. Yeah, that was a long answer, but I think supporting our lowest 20% and our SEND pupils to succeed when it also feels like we don't have much time to get through everything.
Yeah, and I think that time to teach to depth is something that comes up, and we're going to touch upon the foundational skills aspect of some of the recommendations in the interim report as well. Peter.
So for me, the big issue with primary maths, on top of all the good things that are working, and it's not necessarily working for every child, say the bottom 20%, are the gaps been passed through the system. So you can get teachers in year 6 saying, I have to reteach all of year 6. Probably year 5 teachers saying likewise. That makes the curriculum seem really large, doesn't it? That you're having to reteach. Every time you teach year 4, I've got to reteach year 3. Is the curriculum that large? There are some parts to take out, but a lot of it's because you're having to constantly reteach. So to me, the question is why are we having to reteach? Why are the gaps appearing? And the 3 things I picked out from working across a range of schools, teaching in schools, the curriculum has obviously got some rebalancing to do, particularly at Key Stage 1. The gaps are starting there, and then the snowball. I think the amount of content can be trimmed, the nature of the content, and by the nature I mean the year group it's in. I wouldn't entertain teaching analogue time to year 1s, and we don't, because they can't all understand it then. Shift it to year 3, and magically they can all do it because they're ready for it. So it's about where you put things. And I think specificity in the curriculum's missing. So if we're going to teach children to Bridge 10, for example, surely there is an ideal way to teach it. So let's agree on that and make sure every child can experience that. I think teacher preparation's a massive issue. So we have PPA, that's nowhere near enough for teachers to really become an expert in teaching maths. So we're lucky we get to teach maths. That's generally all we do, or definitely all I do. And I can research it, practice it. If I'm doing a lesson for head teachers to watch, I'll practice the lesson for 10 minutes, practice my modelling, get the manipulatives out, practice how I'm going to use them. I'm not sure teachers are afforded that time in the way the education system's set up. So I do think there's an element of giving teachers time for rehearsing, researching. So if I'm teaching time, I'll go on and research how to do it in Shanghai, for example. But also the teachers having that time to just practice manipulatives, chat to each other. And I call it plan B. If your lesson's not worked, watch your backup. Are you ready for that? And that's how you can cater for that bottom 20%. And I also think maybe we need to invest a bit more time in our teaching pedagogy, like the lesson design. If I go back to when I started teaching in 2002, we didn't do some things as well as now, but we definitely practiced more, I think. So children now, I don't think necessarily practice things enough. If you haven't got the depth of practice, I don't think you can do the interleaving, cover all the variations. They don't build up that success. If they get success, they're likely to take a risk on the problem and build from there. So I think all of those things added together create these gaps in the system that mean you're constantly reteaching each year group, and then these children just don't catch up. I mean, if there was one thing I would change really quickly, would be getting on top of addition and subtraction facts of 20 in Key Stage 1. I think they open up so much of maths. Multiplication tables, if you had to, you could tackle them down the memory route. We wouldn't do that. We'd want concepts, but you can. I don't think children remember those addition and subtraction facts. They've got to have strategies and be taught. So I would, a quick change, redesign your Key Stage 1 so those are really taught in a structured way.
Great, thanks, Peter. Open it up to Aidan.
Yeah, sorry, you can hear me. I just wanted to throw some stats in on that. So within the current system, 75% of primary schools in this country have engaged with Teaching for Mastery through maths hubs. every school I visit, or almost every school I visit, is making use of some sort of scheme of work or scheme of learning that is based on the principles of teaching for mastery. So we're in a place where most primary maths teachers are ready to engage with those ideas. They're trying to get access to these ideas, but the system, as you mentioned, isn't necessarily in a place where people are getting the right PPA for it. If you go 10% of school leaders providing someone with 2.5 hours of PPA a week they're not just teaching maths in primary schools, they're teaching all these other subjects. I think that's a really important thing. So I just kind of picked out this idea, time and money. Money to engage with CPD. From my perspective of the work I do, if I ask people if they want to engage in CPD, they'd love to. Every teacher I speak to wants to engage with CPD, but they can't because they don't have somebody to backfill and be in front of children. So that's one of the biggest problems that schools are facing, to be able to actually then engage with this further learning. So yeah, I just thought that 75% of primary schools doing teaching for mastery, that's huge. 9,000 schools are implementing mastering number across this country. Again, that's huge across the early years. And people love these ideas, but they're not given the space to engage with them. So for me, it's time and money.
Yeah, and I think we're going to come back to that at the end in terms of implementing the changes, like the importance of the leadership investment in whatever the changes are. And I think in terms of CPD, giving teachers the time and space to do their own practice as well as pupil practice is really important. Helen, and then we're going to go to the audience and also to online. And I think we've got a poll as well. For people online, something will flash up with some options as the biggest thing that's a challenge. So you've got to pick 3, and then we'll share those results in a minute. Over to you,
So,
Helen.
I mean, it's been said, right, there are successes, we're doing really well, but we haven't said it enough, I don't think. So I'm going to keep saying it because, like, the teaching of maths in primary schools in this country is phenomenally good. And there are teachers all across the country just doing the most incredibly impressive job. And you don't really hear it. You don't really see it in the newspapers. You don't really hear about the really brilliant work that's being done. And it's not just since Teaching for Mastery, it's been like for generations now. There's some really serious work going there. And I think a shift, which is connected to mastery, about what we believe is possible for all young people rather than just some. And it's that shift that I think probably hasn't quite happened enough. And there is potential through the evolution of the curriculum and assessment review to try and just make it a bit easier. There probably isn't going to be any more time. There probably isn't going to be any more money. In fact, there isn't going to be any more time. There isn't going to be any more money. Probability doesn't come into it. But I think there are some barriers at the moment in terms of the design of the national curriculum and assessment, and we'll come on to what those are, but that are just meaning that we're making it harder than it needs to be for primary teachers to do the brilliant work that they're doing. And so I think there's a really exciting opportunity. Like, we are internationally, you know, PISA, TIMSS, like, our kids are doing really well towards the end of primary, and like, it's impressive stuff. So we need to just think about, like, are there places where they're doing well sort of despite the current curriculum and despite the design of the SATs rather than because of it, and just some changes that we can make there. But I think it's such a positive picture for so many schools and for so many young people.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you kind of made that point about positivity. And the tone of the interim report definitely reflects building on something that exists and the positive change that has happened. And I think that's something that is important for teachers and schools to recognise. It's not going to be a kind of big bang change that's scary and potentially really challenging. Hopefully it'll be implemented in a sensitive way that gives schools the space to do things properly and not add to workload. We're going to open out to the audience. We've got a roving mic. So if you've got a point or a question you'd like to ask, please raise your hand. And in a second, have we got the poll ready? Great. So does anybody in the room, would anyone like to ask a question or make a point? While you guys are thinking, maybe we could talk through. So what we did, we gave people online 8 options, like what are the key things that are stopping the maths being as good as it could be. And then we've got the top 3. So Lisa, do you want to share what the results were?
Thanks. This is exciting. So the similar to what has been said, there was a comment around the most popular is being able to cover all the content. So clearly that's something teachers are thinking a lot about. But also the other two, basically equal priority, is that idea of supporting low prior retaining pupils and pupils with SEND as well. So the things that you've mentioned so far are clearly things that other teachers are finding challenging in the curriculum. And if I can add to that, really interesting comment from Charlie, who talked about the fact that in addition to time and money, which has been mentioned, they feel that that kind of teacher's core belief about their ability to teach maths is a real challenge as well. And apologies if you're going to come on to talk about things like that, but mentioning that some teachers are worried they kind of default to a scheme and move on at the pace dictated by that scheme rather than the pace of the learners, which I think you said is a really scary thing to do. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Any last call for people in the room? Brilliant. Okay, we're going to move on to the second section, which is, I guess, like, what do we do about it? What are the recommendations that we would advocate? I'm going to turn to you, Helen. So in the Horizons report, you mentioned foundational concepts. Could you just sort of expand on what you mean by those and why they're important? And a related question, which is really to do with one of the standout recommendations in the report, which is around assessment and assessing those core skills via gateway checks. And you also recommend raising the pass mark for Key Stage 2 stats. So could you talk a little bit about why you think these changes are important, acknowledging that these might feel scary on the face of it to teachers?
I can certainly give it a go. So this idea of foundational knowledge was something that we heard a lot about in the responses to Maths Horizons, and as has already been said on the panel, there's the sense that, for example, number bonds isn't able to be given enough time and attention in Key Stage 1 and lower Key Stage 2. And so children are effectively masking the fact that they don't really know those. And teachers end up sort of masking the fact that these are big gaps. And if you try and imagine following some of the examples of, for example, sort of working with equivalent fractions or calculating with fractions, and you watch a teacher sort of doing things to all of the different numbers on a board, if you don't have those facts at your fingertips, the whole thing becomes complete gobbledygook. So there's a real need to spend the time that young people need on certain concepts, more time. What has been interesting over the sort of 9 months that we've been working on Maths Horizons is we've ended up coming to the conclusion that pretty much all of the content in the national curriculum up to Key Stage 4 is fundamental maths knowledge. That's why it's there. It's fundamental for something. Some of it ends up being fundamental for taking your maths further, doing A-level, doing core maths. Some of it's fundamental for life and for work. It's all fundamental for something because it's the sort of the foundational stones to build the next bit of maths knowledge on. But we've got them slightly in the wrong order, and we've been a little bit too ambitious, or maybe had the wrong definition of ambition in the design of our current curriculum. So what we've done, if we said, Singapore can do this by the age of 12, so we can too. And Japan can do this by the age of 11, so we can too. And over in Shanghai, they're doing this different thing by the age of 10. Let's do that too. And so we've got the primary curriculum filled with lots of things, which are all themselves fundamental knowledge for something later, but we're trying to teach them all in too little time too soon. And we just need to choose. There isn't really a right answer. We need to choose what the order is going to be and leave some things for our Key Stage 3 teachers to be introducing for the first time, so that we don't have a Key Stage 3 curriculum, which is basically a repeat of the Key Stage 2 curriculum. And that's not because our Key Stage 2 children can't understand those things. It's not because they're too young. It's just because rather than teach everything very quickly once and then teach it all over again, it makes more sense to sort of take your time with things first. And I would say calculating, multiplying, dividing fractions, possibly even adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators, eventually that becomes fundamental knowledge. but it's not fundamental for our Key Stage 2 children to be learning, and it can wait. And there are more important things for them to be learning in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 than those. So.
Thank you. And I'm going to come to Peter in a second, because I think a lot of the conversation around the curriculum has been about it being too packed. And I think what comes through in the Horizons report is it's kind of not the point. It's about where the topics are, and are they in a sensible progression, rather than there's inherently too much, even though that might feel the case. We can maybe come back to the assessment point about the Key Stage 2 SATs point in a second, but I'll pass over to Peter and maybe unpack a little bit about some of the things that could move. So that rebalancing or resequencing, what might that look like? Are there some things that could be removed? How would you see a better organisation of the Key Stage 2 curriculum?
So I think firstly it's to complement EYFS, the curriculum in England. I think it's much improved. Taking away the exceeding level has allowed teachers to focus on getting children to know the basics. It's probably a wider discussion. I would add a little curriculum for 0 to 2, which sounds scary, but it's things parents could provide, experiences, the toys. So we often find that there's a huge gap by the time children arrive at the age of 2. But in terms of the primary curriculum, like you've heard me say, I'd probably focus a lot on Key Stage 1. The NCTM, with their curriculum prioritisation, has done a really good outline of how I think it should fall, the new curriculum. So in year 1, I would really try and cap place value to 20, not try and stretch it to 100. Yes, some children can handle it to 100, but all children can handle it to 20, and all can handle it to 100 if you wait till year 2. And we'd still count to 100, but really count in a lot of depth. Make sure all children can actually count through boundaries, find halfway points, give it the time. I'd really structure the addition and subtraction facts, really think about the order they're taught in, the best way to teach them, and really layer in spatial awareness as well. So some of the schools use a scheme called Number Sense. They're all really good, but they've layered in spatial awareness. So 3 add 4 is 7. They use this lovely thing called the 7 tree. So you've got 4 for the crown, 3 for the trunk, and the children pick it up much more when the spatial reason and awareness is layered in, but that takes time. So things that I would move out, so I wouldn't be touching fractions, I don't think, in year 1. I think they're just getting to grips with whole numbers, so keep fractions to a later point. I think division is a touch hard in year 1, if I'm honest. Our teachers always say it has to be retaught pretty much from scratch. And multiplication, think of it in terms of unitising, in terms of money, coin recognition, counting in the coins, tying it together for the links. Like I said before, I would remove analogue time from year 1. It takes so long to teach it, and they don't remember it, all children, because we're after all children, aren't we? And I think something that's not thought of is when you teach things in the wrong place, it detracts from the time you could give to the things that really do need teaching then. So yes, we can spend weeks on analogue time that they don't remember, but they would remember facts of 20 if we gave that the 3 weeks extra. I'd really, like I said, beef up spatial reasoning, more time spent on it and linking it into the number side. Year 2, so I'm analysing lots of data from all of our schools, and I feel year 2 is one we still haven't got quite right in how we do it, and particularly when you're adding two-digit numbers. It involves so many smaller concepts that children, a divide occurs in a class really quickly. So I would take that to year 3. I'd focus on bridging 10 in year 2, spend so much time on how to bridge 10, and then how to actually bridge the other 10. So if you know 7 add 6, can we do 37 add 6? All the direct teaching, practice, variations, get the equipment out, the manipulatives, because they're so important to maths, children feeling it, touching it, but again, you need the time. So removing some of these things that all of the children can't do then frees up the time. For year 3, I would really have an emphasis on mental calculation strategies. So hopefully you've got children coming out of Key Stage 1, knowing their addition, subtraction facts. Now let's use them. Yes, you can use them in columns, and we still would, but really dig into mental strategies, near 10s, near doubles, adjusting. Year 4 is an interesting one. I would take decimals straight out of year 4. I think it's too much, again, for all children. Some children can handle it, but they handle it by memory, really, just where the teacher says the digit goes. I would take out formal multiplication and division from year 4 and just focus on learning those facts, the strategies behind them, layering in place value. Then in year 5, the one we found most controversial, but there's good logic to it, is taking the millions, hundreds of thousands to year 6. Just deal with decimals in the place value unit. It's harder than the millions. We can keep that to year 6. And I think Helen touched on it. The big one for me is taking out calculating with fractions. So I think you get children moving to secondary who can multiply fractions doing some kind of tricks, if you like, but they don't really understand the size of fractions and how they relate to whole numbers. So I'd really focus on fractional sense, if you like, fractions of amounts. And I think lastly, people think about retrieval as kind of like a pedagogy. I think of it as curriculum. So I think it's something we could really think about, that if we're teaching these things at these points in time, have we got a plan about when it's been retrieved? So we generally work on 5 weeks from the research. If we've taught something, we'll bring it back 5 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and then they do remember these things.
Amazing, thanks, Peter. Aidan, do you want to chip in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to come at it from a perspective of my background's mostly in secondary, actually. So I've spent most of my career and most of my life focusing on secondary maths. To kind of reiterate some of those points, maybe go a little bit further, things that I thought about was, first of all, the fractions, thinking about, do we need fractions to be treated as rational numbers at all in primary school? Is that something that could wait until secondary school? So thinking, as you said, dealing with them as more in a proportional sense, the part-whole models, rather than actually thinking about calculating with fractions, because the reality is you go into any secondary school in year 7, they're reteaching how to add, subtract, multiply, divide with fractions with varying degrees of success. I was also thinking about just fractions. Is there a need to compare and order as numbers on a number line? So things that I was thinking about was the idea that if you look at the Oak National Academy year 7, Unit 1, it talks about place value. And some of the first things they're going to be doing in place value is they're going to be introducing headings as to each of the decimals in particular, of the decimal representation of each heading, the fractional headings, and also then the negative index headings as well. So if they're doing that in year 7, part of me thinks, is that not a repetition? And could that then just come straight out of primary and go into secondary, something that we're doing anyway in year 7? Why not have secondary teachers know it's their first engagement with it? So then I thought, well, then maybe decimals just go entirely into secondary as well. And their first engagement with decimals is again in year 7. And I was just thinking about the building up of the number system. So think about, you've got your natural numbers, which is your counting numbers, then moving into your positive integers, and then thinking, well, maybe then we go into, in secondary, we do the rational numbers. So then you're introducing your fractions. Then you're starting to think about your negative integers, including them, and then you're moving on into Key Stage 4 with thinking about real numbers and irrational numbers and so on and so forth. Because I just thought, is there a need for students to calculate with these things, when I'll be honest, most of them can't when they come into year 7. And with decimals, they can't find halfway between two numbers. Thinking about infinities, the unbounded infinity of being able to count on, there's a number after this one, that's an idea that students are quite comfortable with. But the bounded infinity, there's a number between a number, between a number, between a number, that's a really difficult concept. And so if you show most year 7s I've taught, even high attaining students, what's halfway between 1.2 and 1.25, they struggle with finding that 1.125, I'm hoping that's correct off the top of my head, because they see the 125 and think 125 is bigger than, no, that's not right, is it? Between 1 and 1.2, whatever. You get the point I'm trying to make. Maths anxiety kicking in right here. But you understand the point I'm trying to make. And then I started thinking, well, what about coordinate grids as well? We have a lot of students that come into secondary that we reteach them coordinate grids in all 4 quadrants. Do students need to have seen all 4 quadrants in primary school? Some of them have, some of them haven't. And if they've only seen the integers and only comfortable with integers, are we then making them think that when we deal with coordinate grids, all points are integer coordinates? And a lot of students come in and the grid lines are always on 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, so on and so forth. So if they've not really built that understanding of that bounded infinity, they really struggle with that idea of the four quadrants. The only caveats I thought about were money and how do you deal with money, because the reality is all children will see money before we formalise decimals. That's where the challenge in my mind comes. And then thinking about geography with maps and things like that. I was in the escape room the other day where there was coordinates on the back of the room, and I thought, if we're not showing them coordinates until year 7 or year 8 maybe, we've got some issues there. So I just thought they were a couple of things that really stood out to me. It kind of echoes what you've said, and I think maybe I've taken it a whole step further, but just thinking about the reality in secondary classrooms, about the things they are just reteaching again, and it's not the fault of primary schools at all. The teaching is often outstanding when you watch it. It's that they've learnt so many things, they've not learnt it competently, I suppose.
Yeah, brilliant. Go on, Helen.
I'm impressively going to resist the temptation to now say which of those I agree and disagree with, because we could use days, right? But I think this is a really important debate to be having. And we've got such expertise in this country now, from really people have been engaging with it, people have been moving things from key stage to key stage, there have been decisions made. Like, let's have that conversation properly. I did just want to make the point, though, that rightly there's been a focus on the bottom 20% and the changes we could make so that they have more time to really secure the knowledge that they need. But almost all of the suggestions that are being made with them in mind would also be beneficial, not a disadvantage, to the children right at the other end of the attainment spectrum. And I think it's really important that we recognise that this isn't about like slowing it down so that the kind of quicker grasper children are sort of waiting for the others to catch up. We're not diminishing our expectations for them. We're getting everybody to do more actual maths and to do more actual reasoning, and it enables there to be a maths curriculum which is actually about maths. So any of these decisions, you know, yes to coordinate grids moving to Key Stage 3, not so sure about tenths and hundredths, but anyway, all of those decisions would mean that with the maths that you were teaching, you could be much more mathematical and do much more reasoning, which benefits the whole range.
Yeah, and I think there's a key point about if you're going to take stuff out or move stuff away, like what do you do instead? And it's about really making that idea of mastery, deeper knowledge, an important part of how teachers see the teaching of maths. I mean, I personally think that there's a risk that some teachers are going to be a bit scared by this whole idea of less in the curriculum, because maybe there's a safety net that you have just being on that treadmill and just teaching. Actually being expected to know about how to teach maths to a deeper level can be scary if you're not a math specialist. So maybe we'll come back to that in the third part in terms of actually how do we make this work so that we're delivering the gains that you're hoping from that rebalancing. I know that this idea of what do we move, what do we change, what do we take out, and everyone has their thing that they're really passionate about. Does anybody have anything in the room that they want to make a point or make a claim for in terms of how you would rebalance the curriculum? And maybe we can look online as well. I know that you guys have a pet peeve or a pet subject. It's always fractions, isn't it? Yeah, Amanda?
If we're doing pet projects, so I'm from Voice 21, so we are the National Oracy Charity, and we look at the speaking and listening that children need, both to access the curriculum, but then also to kind of thrive in school and then later in life. And one thing that we have been hearing over and over again in the last 5 years, which is the time I've been working at Voice 21, as schools switch on to maths mastery approaches, as they start putting, as you put it, Helen, like, you know, actually doing maths at the heart of their maths curriculum, is that they're increasingly finding that for that bottom 20%, some of the problems with access are maths gaps in terms of their knowledge, but some of them are the ability to engage in those conversations in the classroom. So if I were going to rebalance the curriculum, I would also be thinking about what are the kinds of skills and knowledge that children need to engage in really robust mathematical reasoning with their peers around their table, but also back and forth with the teacher. And how are we making those explicit so that they're completely visible and as transparent as the foundational maths knowledge that they need to engage in those conversations, so that once again, all children are able to access that learning and come along with everybody else in the primary classroom.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to make a plea or a case for anything in particular? Bruno?
Thank you. Helen will remember this when we looked at the maths curriculum over 15 years ago, I think, at KSA. I was just going to ask about, because I'm less familiar with the primary curriculum, things that you might separate that often get taught together and then get conflated. So one thing that we did at KSA, after a realization that by teaching area and perimeter back to back, lessons back to back, they would often get conflated, or mean, median and mode, or factors and multiples. Other examples in the primary curriculum that you might think, oh, you know what, if we separated them, we give the children a better chance of kind of individually understanding each one, and then later on in the term or in the year, bringing them back together for them to appreciate the similarities and the differences in the constructs.
Great. Naveen?
Hi, fantastic points, lots to think about. The one thing that I am considering when I do any kind of curriculum design or curriculum resourcing, after being mainly secondary focused, is by rebalancing the curriculum in primary and allowing there to be essentially more time, possibly, how much of the debate is considering helping children articulate their understanding in actual words? So for example, if I think about my goddaughter, she's 5, and we have quite a lot of conversations around like numbers and positioning. Yes, I do that with her. So I'm thinking about kids who enter year 7 who are very strong procedurally, and they are strong in terms of computation, concept understanding, but they're not able to articulate the why. I'm not saying teach the why only. I'm definitely not on that camp. But what I am is, how do we look at the primary curriculum and think, what can we do which can help children articulate their foundational, fundamental understandings? For example, like, why does the number, when you go to the left of 0, get smaller, as in, like, sorry, get larger, like -5, then -6, then -7? Why is that value getting larger, but it's getting more negative? So, like, how do we look at the primary curriculum for children to learn how to articulate with words their conceptual understanding? I think that makes it really hard for teachers in secondary to understand why children are not able to communicate their struggles in mathematics, because if they can't talk about mathematics meaningfully, I'm not saying in a relevance way, I'm talking about explaining why -5 take away 7 gets you -12, and the number in their eyes gets larger, but it's actually more negative and smaller. Do you see what I mean? I'm not articulating it very well, but it's something I'm thinking about.
It's about expressing their deeper understanding and having the tools
and having the
to
language to articulate it to an adult, so we can understand if they conceptually get what we're discussing.
Thank you. Does the panel want to respond? We've got a point about things being close together in the curriculum, which I think is an interesting point, and kind of oracy and being able to express, having the tools to express your understanding. Palesa?
Yeah, to speak to that point, I think it's not possible for a child to be able to articulate themselves really clearly if they haven't heard someone articulate themselves really clearly. And we talk a lot at my school about like letting children in on the secret of how to think like a mathematician, a writer, a scientist, whatever the subject is. And I think we haven't spoken lots about reasoning and problem solving, but I think actually through reordering and kind of reshifting, hopefully what will happen is there is more time and space to actually really teach reasoning and problem solving. And I think it's often a challenge for your GDS pupils. And it's like, if you finish the calculations, try this reasoning problem, and we don't protect enough time to explicitly model how to solve those problems and do a really well-planned, well-delivered think aloud of how to do that guided annotation or how to think systematically. And that can happen because you're trying to fit everything in and keep up. So actually having the focus, either through training and coaching, on what does that teacher input look like, that's how we'll get our children able to. Because yes, you can plan lots of taught partners throughout the lesson. And yes, you can ensure that, littered through the lesson, you've got these opportunities to try and explain it. But actually, for the children who are finding the concept difficult, they actually need to hear it as well. They're not going to reach that conclusion on their own. And I think we don't, at the moment, have enough time to do that really, really well.
Great. I think we're going to move on to the next part, unless we've got any questions from the online audience.
Thank you. So the chat has been talking a lot about the need for developing teacher understanding, and just something that came up in Get Rid of Things. We were talking about formal algebra, not algebra as a concept, but that kind of replacing specifically with letters could be pushed into Key Stage 3 as well. That seems to be a bit of a pet peeve. The question I've got though is related to something you said earlier, Peter, about what you'd get rid of in focusing on numbers to 20. So you might be the person in the best place to answer this. So the question is, would you recommend that pupils in Key Stage 1 know addition and subtraction facts within 20 by rote, or having strategies to work them out? The anonymous question asker does say that they know both is ideal, but in terms of where would you put your priority? Would you prioritise learning by rote or learning kind of strategies for finding them?
So with multiplication facts, you would definitely want them learnt through concepts, but you could, if you wanted to, go down the memorisation route. It can work. We wouldn't want that. I've never found children with the addition and subtraction facts who can do it rote. They have to go through that process of bridging 10, splitting numbers before they get to it. And actually, when you quiz your Key Stage 1 children and you look in their eyes when you ask them these questions like 7 add 6, very few just know it, but you quickly see a strategy kick in. So to me, it would be as much time as possible on the concepts behind it, as long as it turns into an automatic fact. I think that has to be underlined as well, that not just facts, not just concepts, but both. So something I missed out talking about the curriculum earlier, I think everyone agrees things like mastering number, you mentioned, really successful, number sense. For schools thinking whole school, it's really hard to timetable that 10 minutes a day. It's really, really tricky in the wider curriculum. So if these things are working so well and they're so important, the concepts behind them, I really think they should become the actual main curriculum. So that, I think that answers it fully, that it has to be conceptually with lots of time, lots of practice, but it has to turn into a fact. And that's why I would advocate fact fluency checks to make sure it does end up in a fact.
Yeah. Lots of nods in the room. I think lots of people agree with that. Okay, we're going to move on to the last section, which is about implementation. You kind of touched a little bit on that, Peter. I'm going to turn to Palesa first as a school leader. So what would you say are the key ingredients to ensure that the new curriculum, so these things that we've been talking about that we'd like, can be actually implemented effectively? And what are the potential pitfalls? So I guess this is a question about, like, how do you actually make it work in reality?
I think it's the same as implementing any new change. A lot of the key thinking is similar. I think it's enough time to engage with it and to make sure that leaders feel secure in what they're trying to actually deliver. And then enough time for staff to receive training and coaching and drop-ins and more coaching and time to kind of interrogate what they're doing. But I think ultimately, it's holding true to what we do already know works really well about the curriculum. I think going into it is we've got this big change and it feeling like a really huge, scary thing isn't the right approach. We do know what makes great maths teaching, and we should be using that in the approach. I'm going to touch on something you spoke about earlier with regards to PPA. We do something at my school called intellectual preparation, which maybe is a luxury, but it's one that we are committed to, which is that our year group teams and a senior leader have an hour of English intellectual preparation a week and an hour of maths. And in that session, the teacher who has planned the maths for the following week will bring those lessons, and it is an opportunity to review the slides, identify the misconceptions, plan the questions, and ultimately get up and practice and receive feedback from one another, but also complete the work that pupils will be doing. Can be less necessary when children are really young, but particularly for upper Key Stage 2, actually just time to sit and yourself do lots of long division as well. So you've gone through that process, particularly if you're new to the year group. And it's also an opportunity to compare books across the 3 classes and almost do a kind of low stakes mini moderation, ensure that everyone is achieving to the same standard, completing the same amount of work. This is time consuming, but it's something our staff really love and get a lot out of. And I think it's what makes the biggest difference in developing our teachers. Yes, we do whole school training once a week, but actually that kind of bespoke training essentially for you and your year group team, and that opportunity to bring things each week is what makes the difference and moves them along. And then in terms of giving individual teachers their coaching steps, making them really manageable, but also giving enough time in between coaching for them to implement it and actually have some trial and error and figure out for themselves as well what's working well.
Thank you. Lots of really good tips there. I would say with the intellectual prep, I know that lots of teachers, lots of ARC teachers in particular, use that to practice. So you mentioned, Peter, about practicing, pupils practicing, but teachers practicing with each other. How am I going to do this talk task? How am I going to do this direct modelling session? And I think giving teachers the time to do that is really, really important. Just before we move on to the next question, which is about technology, which I think is really important to touch on. Does anyone want to just touch on, maybe Helen, about the pitfalls? So curriculum implementation, what are the things we definitely don't want to do in relation to the curriculum assessment review that would be bad for schools and bad for teachers?
Things that we want the curriculum and assessment review to avoid changing. So I'm going to not quite answer your question, sorry, Will. But I just wanted to say that through the Maths Horizons work, so it's independent review of the curriculum and assessment in maths, and we've been lucky enough to work really closely with the curriculum and assessment team with Becky Francis. And I really just wanted to reassure that there's simply no desire to do any change that's going to create work and challenge for an absolutely brilliant and already very hardworking workforce. Like the clear intent is to listen to all of the brilliant responses, many of them made by people in this room, to the assessment review, and to make the changes that are going to make it easier to do the good things that people are already trying to do. So I genuinely believe that the recommendations that Becky Francis's team make in the area of primary maths are going to be ones which will be welcome and will be kind of genuinely seen as opportunities by teachers in schools, and be a kind of like, oh, that makes it easier to do the good things that we wanted to do before. And it's going into it with that mindset of like, let's only make a change if it's not just what we've heard from the sector that is really needed, but also it's going to be worth that hard effort of change.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think that I agree with you, and I think it is reassuring, the language and the tone that's come through so far, and hopefully long may that continue. It almost feels a bit mad asking this question because it's such a big topic, but this is about AI. So in terms of that implementation, are there any opportunities or things that we can look to in terms of technology supporting the implementation of the new curriculum? And I'm going to ask that of you, Aidan, because I know you've got some interesting ideas.
We don't have that long. I could talk about this for a long time, but yeah. I think the thing to remember is technology is not new in maths education. There has been so much technology around for so long and quite poorly used, if I'm honest. And the big reason for that is people don't have the time and the space to think about these things. A simple example I would give is calculators. Calculators have been around plenty long enough, but you'll still see good implementation of calculators, bad implementation of calculators. If I'm honest, the only technology we really see in classrooms is PowerPoint. And that people are clicking and flicking through these things. So I was thinking, well, what changed with calculators? We've got a recent precedent in the sense of the A-level curriculum, for example. Calculators, when I did my A-levels, I felt like I had a magic thing that gave me loads of time that I could do my statistics with my graphical calculator. I felt like I had a head start against everyone else. Now there's an expectation that students use it, and so teachers will deliberately teach how to use calculators when they're teaching A-level statistics, for example. In fact, to the point where students are penalised if they're not using their calculators and they're demonstrating non-calculator methods in their exams. So we've got an example of where a curriculum has been affected by that. But thinking about the things that are coming on, I just want to share a colleague of mine who I greatly admire, Pip Heighton. I'm going to name drop her. She shared a reminder recently about Malcolm Swan, and Malcolm Swan said in a 2007 article, so it's not that recent anymore, unfortunately, but where one of the 8 principles of effective teaching was using technology in appropriate ways. And that's all we're really talking about here, I think. I don't think AI is in a place where the curriculum review is going to be able to, and teachers, the people that are designing curriculum are able to implement and go, this is what we're going to do with it, because it's still in its infancy. But I think if I were going to a school and thinking, well, what does that mean for a teacher? You want to think about, what do we do with calculators? Well, we purposefully plan where we're going to implement use of calculators. We know that children are going to use it. We've all got phones in our pockets with calculators. So AI, our children are already using them. They're already on ChatGPT typing in all sorts of things. But with calculators, what goes wrong? People don't know how to input into them. They don't know how to evaluate the outputs from them. Where they're really great is they give us access to a lot of other concepts that save us time with calculating. For example, I go back to statistics. We can spend a lot more time now evaluating what the statistics mean as opposed to just calculating those statistics. So for the primary curriculum, if we're thinking about calculators to begin with, we want to make sure we give them a space and we say, this is how you're going to use a calculator. What mistakes have happened with this? An example with squaring, a classic example with calculators, you put in brackets -1 and square it versus just -1 squared, 2 different outputs from your calculator. Really common mistake that happens for students. So AI, what might we want to be thinking about? I think the best schools, they're going to be thinking about how they use this in their classrooms. They're going to be thinking about how they address this. I don't personally feel that the actual curriculum is necessarily, I might be wrong, I don't think the curriculum will change any of the content or anything about that will change. But what I do think is the best schools will be saying to students, evaluate this output. Here's a mistake that AI made. Can you spot it? Can you troubleshoot it? Can you maybe come up with some prompts? What inputs you might want to put into AI? I think they're the things that we're going to be thinking about in our classrooms, as opposed to, the curriculum's going to tell us you have to teach how to use AI here. I just think sensibly, teachers are going to be thinking about these things, and the best schools will be doing just that. I could go on. I mean, I mentioned Wolfram Alpha has been around for a long time, and I used it through my degree, and it didn't stop me learning things. It actually allowed me to understand things better because I could put in graphs and ask it to output things, sense check my ideas, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think at the moment, if I were to say to schools, what could you be doing? Think about how you might want to run these things alongside what you're already doing. For example, if you're doing calculations, what prompts might you put into an AI to do that? Think about technology that's already out there, Polypad, GeoGebra, Desmos, whatever it is. There's so many things out there that you can already use that aren't being used. I'm going to stop there because I could go on forever about technology, but that's kind of the point I think I would make on this.
Yeah, reflecting on particularly that list of those technologies as well, I would say primary practitioners, and maybe this is just me, but knowing what those can do and how they can help, particularly those like graphing, that's the wrong word, but like how you graphing programs, which can be really helpful to model something that is hard to do without that technology. Primary school practitioners don't necessarily know about those. So maybe it's about giving them the time to be able to use that technology.
I was just thinking as well, it also gives opportunities for more problem solving and reasoning, because students can then engage with dynamical representations where you change one thing, what's staying the same, what's different, all those kind of things. It opens up more powerful questions. I think that's the key thing for me. Conjecturing, refining, those kinds of things.
I really want to open this one up to the room before we finish on our final question. Does anybody have any points on the implementation side? So any kind of things that you would think are really important to consider when implementing whatever the recommendations are? Yeah, Rory?
Hi, thank you. Really, really interesting. I was just thinking about the importance of sort of a cultural shift along with sort of a practical shift. Helen, you spoke really clearly about how all students can benefit from going deeper and not faster. And I think, Peter, you were really clear about the benefits of teaching content that all children can engage with and be successful at. And you also talked about the change in the early learning goals. And I think that was really clear. I started teaching and I still have it imprinted in me, the idea of like 2 levels of progress and showing it with greater depth. And I get to go and see lots of schools. And I think one of the things that's holding back a lot of our teachers is they're teaching 3 lessons at the same time and trying to sort of meet all the different needs. And that's sort of really culturally embedded. And I wonder, maybe you put as a school leader, how do you redefine success and it not being pushing children as far as they possibly can, but actually getting all children to that threshold? So like you were saying, Aidan, they come up to secondary school with the necessary skills to build on that, rather than us having pushed every child to meet their individual needs, which is an admirable goal, but gets sort of it's a challenge to implementation, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else in the room? Lisa, I'm sure we've got questions online.
Yes. Questions and comments. First of all, the chat absolutely loves Palesa's talk about intellectual preparation and the need for modelling, particularly saying about, I think it was Rachel who said about, we as teachers, we often might rehearse something like long division, but we neglect to perhaps rehearse how we might teach a child to use the Make 10 strategy or the Bridging 10 strategy, and whether actually we've almost got that backwards and that we need to be modelling in intellectual prep time to do things like that. There's a bit of talk about AI and so on, which, to be honest, I know very little about. So Pip has suggested that we need a national strategy for AI, and says that dynamic technology allows for children to be curious and ask what if, which I suppose is a really nice point about using technology in the classroom in that way. I think there's also talk about the importance of moving away from PowerPoints and so on as well.
Brilliant. And just before we finish, just thank you to everybody that's contributed comments and questions online. And hopefully we've answered a lot of those today. Just in terms of the last point, really, again, on implementation, I'm going to ask each of you in a very pithy way to give one piece of advice to schools. How would you prepare for curriculum change? What would be one piece of advice that you would want to give them? And I'll start with Palesa.
I think it's just being really secure on what it is you want to do and what it is you want to achieve. And I think we can get so caught up in a scheme or a PowerPoint. And actually, I always say you should actually be able to go into any lesson with just a flip chart and a pen and deliver the content, because everything should be up here. Obviously, that's a tall order to remember everything, but you should be able to go in and effectively model something clearly, ask appropriate questions, and provide children with opportunities to practice it. So I think it's spending the time ensuring that everybody knows what success looks like. What do children really need to know and show in this lesson? And how do I ensure that happens? And kind of shutting out the rest of the noise. And I think, I often refer to it as PowerPoint karaoke, but this sense of like opening a PowerPoint and going live and just kind of clicking through, pausing on that and making sure that we're going back to teachers being experts and being confident and being able to teach the content well.
Great. Peter?
So I guess we don't really know what the government are going to give us a new curriculum, but I think we can future-proof ourselves in our schools about what it would be by really investing in lesson design. Think about how, it's kind of like what you were saying there, how is the best way to teach this for all children, that gets all secure, that deepens other children. So whatever the curriculum comes, we've got this vehicle to deliver it really, really well. And touching on your point earlier about the teaching model and greater depth, something we've tried a lot this year is that model of like, we'll do fluency, reasoning, problem solving, greater depth, changing it round and thinking actually in our lesson design, after task one, if you finished, we are waiting for everybody. You guys are going to do greater depth on that task. Now we're all ready for the next task. And if you're done, brill, we're waiting for everybody. Do some greater depth on that. So you're adding greater depth each layer to wait. And we've invested a lot of time looking at lesson design. And when we get a new curriculum, we can just drop that into it. So that would be my tip. Think about your lesson design that you can build around it.
I've sort of got two. I'll try my best to make it sound like one. The first one, we talked about focusing on the early years. Give your early years practitioners time to think about how they teach maths. The example I give is Mastering Number, the SKTM for early years that we run through the maths hubs. They've been really successful. I'm just thinking about the school I work in. The teachers felt like they were then developing their own expertise and they were treated like experts. I think it's really easy to think of teachers that are in reception as not maths experts. I'll be honest, I think I would find it harder to teach reception than I would year 10 or 11. And so giving them the CPD and the space to do that. The other one I just want to touch on, because we haven't really mentioned it, if we're spending, or if we've got more curriculum time available to focus on, or the same amount of time but less content, those students that may be within the current system that already are achieving greater depth, fantastic, they're working in a system that isn't maybe perfect. Just thinking what we do for those students as well. How do we make sure that those students are still getting that bit extra, that whether that's through enrichment programs, whatever it is, I just think that's something that people might want to spend some time thinking about. What the answer is, I don't know. But
I agree with all of those, which is handy because it means I can do a fourth tip. I think it is being really clear on what you are already doing well and thinking about how the changes that come are going to enable you to do that thing even better. So just trying to see it as an opportunity to definitely not stop doing the things that people are doing that are brilliant, keep doing that, and hopefully seize those opportunities to make sure that even more children can be successful.
Yeah, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's going to be a plug, I'm sorry, but I would say all of the things that you guys have mentioned, so really good lesson design, space for intellectual preparation. I would add, really thinking about what are those foundational skills and am I supporting those really, really well? All of those things are done very, very well in Maths Mastery Primary, so check it out. And obviously we will be thinking about these things a lot over the coming months in terms of our own program development and really trying to make it as future-proofed as possible so that you can pick it up and deliver whatever the new curriculum looks like to the best that you can. We've run out of time. That hour absolutely sped by. I just want to say a massive thank you to our wonderful panelists. Really, really interesting. I know that here in EdCity, we're going to take some of this conversation away and continue chatting maths. Thank you everybody who logged in online for your amazing comments and questions. But yes, I'll let everybody go. So thanks so much.